Hello, my name is Stigma, and today I'll be teaching you how to play Conquest. I just wanted to start off by saying this isn't like the rules for Smite. As a MOBA, there are many different styles of play and many different ways to play the game. There's usually not just one correct choice, so I can't really just tell you what to do, but I can at least help you try to make some educated decisions that will hopefully improve your gameplay. So just keep in mind that this is how I like to play, and hopefully it'll help you discover a way that you like to play. I'm gonna start by going over. I'll just go through a game and sort of highlight some of the key decisions and why they're good decisions to make, and some bad decisions as well. This is going to be from the support or jungle perspective, as that's just what I like to play. So we're just going to go over a couple things quickly before we get started. We're going to look at the Furies, what they do, what their value is, as well as the Pyromancer, and potentially buffs, but the buffs aren't really that important. Like, they are important, but they're not as important as the major objectives. So the Gold Fury is basically just gold, as the name implies. It's 130 gold to each member of the team who defeats it. So it's about 600 gold, 650, somewhere around there. And it scales throughout the game. So it's pretty much just gold. It's good early game. It kind of falls off late game. Like, Gold Fury is really bad late game once everybody hits 20 and your builds are all rounded out. Oni Fury gives you a wave of Oni minions as well as 120 gold, and it scales a little bit less than the Gold Fury. So it's still going to be about 500 gold, but you get the Oni minions, which are extremely powerful, and they can actually take structures if they're left unattended to. So when you take an Oni wave, that's when you want to start looking at other bigger objectives like Fire Giant, or even just split pushing. So in my opinion, Oni Fury is the best Fury to get late game. Primal Fury gives you a buff that gives your team members a 7% increased damage and 7% reduced damage from jungle camps and bosses, and it stacks 3 times. So this applies to other Furies, Pyromancer, and Fire Giant. So, in my personal opinion, Gold Fury has the highest value early game, as it can help you get a lead. Primal Fury is better towards the mid to late game, and then Oni Fury is the late game Fury that you're going to want. Once you're sort of like full build, you don't really want Primal or Gold at all because they don't really do anything for you. Pyromancer is a significantly less valuable objective in terms of gold, but you're still getting a decent chunk of XP, as well as the Runic Bomb, which can help you maybe take a tower or a Pheonix. Fire Giant is the major objective that you're going to want to go for. It's worth a lot of gold and XP, as well as giving you the Fire Giant buff, which allows you to siege Pheonixes and take towers. So in the first 30 minutes, it is a buff that gives 70 magical power, 50 physical power, 3% of your health regen, and 2% mana every 5 seconds. And your damage against towers and Pheonixes is increased by 25%. After 30 minutes, it becomes Fire Giant's Rage, which gives you more power, the same amount of regen, and it increases your damage to towers and Pheonixes by 30%, and you ignore 75% of the backdoor protections. I wanted to make this guide before the mid-season update. So the Stygian beacons actually aren't in the game yet, but I'm just gonna give my opinion on the value of a Stygian beacon. It's not a ton of gold, but it is a permanent 5% additional damage to structures, unleashed titans, and 1% additional move speed per stack. So this is kind of like a permanent fire giant buff. So in my opinion, the Stygian beacons are probably the most, if not the most valuable, the second most valuable. Like, I wouldn't trade a fire giant for a Stygian beacon stack, but I would trade a Fury or a Pyromancer. So if you look at Fire Giant's Might, it's actually, it's 25% damage increase to towers and phoenixes. And if you get all 3 Stygian beacon stacks, it is a 15% increase. Right here, 5% per stack. So it really is like, it's basically a permanent Fire Giant buff. So I would value that extremely highly. So the first thing we're going to want to talk about is where you start. Normally the duo lane starts green buff and Cyclops, and they pull them together, clear them, go to purple, and then go to lane. The jungler starts at the duo side speed and then meets the mid laner at red buff. And the solo laner and mid laner pull the blue buff, speed buff, and XP cap together and then clear them, and then the mid laner goes to red and the solo laner goes to their lane. So when you get to lane, you want to focus on clearing the minions so that you hit level 2 before your opponents. Having a level lead is extremely important, especially in the early game. And if you're behind, you don't want to walk into the lane. You want to take safer pathing if you are late to lane, and that's a good example of why. We were level 2, we had more abilities, and we had CC. So Sol ended up dying there. It's not a big deal because it's level 1, her respawn timer is like 2 seconds, and she's just going to come back to lane, and she doesn't really miss a lot of farm, right? Like, she misses a wave, half a wave. So Odin has to recall, which means we can kind of just kill Sol here because she stepped up. But one thing you need to remember is that kills don't win games. If we just killed Sol and then, like, just, you know, clear the wave, go do our purple, we're not really pushing our advantage. We really need to invade their buffs and take resources away from them. Because I'm level 5, we have that advantage. Sol died. She's not going to be here. And we capitalize off of it. So when you get kills in the early game, you need to think about like what else you can take away from your opponent, what you can get from that. It's not just the kill that's important. You need to be taking resources away from your opponents. And you also really need to capitalize on the level spikes that you have. So like how we were 5 and they were only level 4. Like how when we were level 2 and they were level 1. Those are the kind of things you need to take advantage of. If you're laning, you can kind of just stay in your lane and just soak up XP. But whenever there's nothing in your lane, you want to be going for neutral farm. Like Fenrir just went for those side camps here. That's a really good play by Fenrir because we can't go over to contest it. Otherwise, we'll miss this mid wave. And honestly, missing a mid wave to maybe get some neutral farm isn't really worth it. And now, this is a good example of map awareness. Cuckoo saw me walk over towards the duo lane on the minimap. He could have pinged Sol. I don't know if he did, but Sol could have also seen on her minimap that I was coming over, and she would have just backed up a little bit. I didn't even really go over to get the kill on her. She just happened to not back up. I was actually going to invade the purple, because what you really want to do is once you've started invading buffs, you want to take them like as frequently as you can. Because just taking one isn't really a big deal, but once you take it over and over and over again, you're just denying so many resources from your opponents, especially in the solo lane. Like, when a solo laner doesn't have their blue buff, it is the worst thing to try to play. Because you're just going to be starved of mana, you're behind in levels, and you can't play the game. And you need to be really careful about not overstaying. We saw Fenrir there, and we kind of just overstayed a little bit. We didn't need to try to fight him, especially without ult. And actually, Erlong Shen has poked out Sun Wukong quite a bit. Wukong has no mana, and he's at like a quarter or a third HP. So I just want to go and help Erlong invade. And again, securing the blue buff is more important than trying to get a little bit of damage onto Kali. If we kill her, great, but denying Wukong a blue buff is much more valuable than killing Kali, because this is going to basically ruin Wukong's lane, because he's not going to get a blue buff for pretty much the rest of the game. And a lot of the times, you might not understand what your team wants to do. If they don't want to do something, just stop. I wanted to dive there, Erlong didn't, so I just turn around immediately. The second that Erlong stays out of the tower, that tells me that he doesn't want to dive. So you really need to pay attention to the body language that your teammates are showing you. And you need to be aware of what your body language is telling your teammates. So right here, me still hovering around here, even though I've taken his blue, is telling Erlong that I want to dive Wukong. But I don't think Erlong does, and I don't blame him. So you'll notice here, Erlong got ganked again by Kali. Erlong does not have a blue buff on him, so I know that Kali is going to come invade our blue buff, because we've been invading hers the entire game, and we 100% win this fight if I hit my abilities. Wukong doesn't have his blue buff, and like he's out of mana, so he just dies here. Kali doesn't win this fight. I straight to blue buff. I don't want any of his XP. I just go straight to blue buff. And again, Kali's out of mana. Erlong's taking the tower right now. He's coming through the tower. Easy. It's all about body language, understanding what fights you win, and paying attention to your opponent's resources, and also denying that resources, right? Like, we could have just killed Wukong and left. Kali would have gotten the blue buff. Wukong would have come back. He would have had the blue buff on him. He's 3 levels behind right now. And he's not even doing that bad. I think that was like his first or second death. And now, because we've got that tower, because we're winning in basically all of our lanes now, we can afford to invade more of their jungle, and their deficit is just going to keep growing. So if you look, they are 10k behind almost. And I would have been going for objectives a little bit earlier, but Arthur is really, really, really bad at taking like Furies and Pyros and stuff. You really need to have your ADC there. So again, you'll notice I'm not focusing on kills here. I'm focusing on farming, getting my lanes ahead, and denying my opponent's resources. Like, the kills don't really matter. The kills don't win you the game. It's denying your opponent's resources and just trying to push your lead where you can, and understanding what fights you can take, what fights you can win, and what fights you don't want to take, and what you can give up. One thing that I will point out that is very important is once you get to the late game, Gold Furies are not worth doing unless, like, if Fire Giant is up, you cannot do a Gold Fury or an Oni Fury or a Primal Fury. You cannot do a Fury if Fire Giant is up. If the enemy team sees you go to the Fury and they see your team on the Fury, they can just go do Fire for free. And they can finish it before you finish. Like, you'll finish the Fury and walk over, and they'll probably be done Fire. So in the late game, you really need to have ward coverage around the Fire Giant. Now, if you'll notice, you can see, I'm just going to pause it for a second. Oh, this is a bad frame. So I'm just going to pause it for a second. You can see that red border around the Fury. This means that the enemy team has oracles, and they have vision of the Fury pit. So they know that we're doing Oni Fury. So this is probably a pretty bad call, just considering that Cuckoo's in mid lane, and Izanami and Ishel are in base. So it's just Ravana and me. Yes, we have ultimate, but it doesn't, like, it's still super dangerous. Like, we're not going to win if 3 or 4 of the enemy team comes late. We might win a 2v2, but I'm going to be extremely debuffed from the Fury. And again, they just have the Cuckoo ult to secure it. So usually you don't want to do objectives when the enemy team has vision of them. So we've gotten the Fire Giant, we've reset. We're waiting for our teammates to rejoin us in mid. We don't want to fight right now. We want to wait for our team to show up. Odin engages on us, but luckily our teammates are close enough to join us, and we kind of just win because we're so far ahead at this point. Like, we're almost 10k gold up, so our opponents can't really fight into us very well. They don't want to fight us outside of their Pheonixes because we have Fire Giant. So when the enemy team has Fire Giant, these outer towers aren't really worth it. They're kind of just going to go down pretty easily. And you really want to defend your Pheonixes. The Pheonixes are a lot more valuable than the towers, because if you lose a tower, you're not really going to spawn the fire minions. Also, understanding when you can end the game and when you can't is really important. Our Izanami and our Cuckoo aren't here, and they still have 2 of their T2 towers up. So the Titan is going to be extremely tanky. Even though they had like 30 seconds on their respawn timers, there's no way that Ishel, Ravana, and Baron can take out a Titan while they still have 2 T2 towers. So Ravana realized that immediately and just went straight to the right lane, which is a really good call. And now we could try to siege the Pheonix, but again, we've got the gold from the towers that we just took. It's better just to reset and group up. We can go for maybe a Primal Fury and then set up for Fire Giant so that we can siege the other lanes. So this is an example of understanding when you can and can't win a game. We pretty much, we get the deicide here. All 4 of us are healthy. Somebody pinged the Titan and Fenrir VGS to attack the Gold Fury. Now, the Titan was the call here because we have 2 fire waves pushing into the Titan. If we just run to the Titan right now, we win the game. Like, the game is over right now. But because we decided to go to a Fury, which was a really bad decision, the game gets extended by like 15 minutes. Like, it's a 40-minute game, I think. So you really need to understand when you can end the game and when you can't. Like that other example where we had 2 towers up, there was no way we could end the game there. So we just went and took other objectives. We took farm away from our opponents. This one was a really bad call because Primal Fury isn't even that valuable at this point in the game, because we're 30 minutes in, because we're like full build, we're going to shred through the Fire Giant. The Fury doesn't really matter. It'll help us take it a little bit faster, but again, we're like 10k gold ahead. The game's over. We should have just gone to the Titan. And now because of that blunder, the enemy team gets their Pheonixes back. They're going to lose the mid lane Pheonix, but they end up getting the Fire Giant. So again, this is a good example of understanding the map state. So look at the waves and look at the Pheonixes. We cannot really siege the Pheonix without a minion wave. We do have enhanced Fire Giant, so we're gonna like shred through the Pheonix. We could potentially do it because the other 2 Pheonixes are down, but the left Pheonix is coming up. They're all gonna group up. It's like, it takes like 10 seconds to push this minion wave. So I go to push the minion wave and they just want to siege the Pheonix, which again, this is one of those situations where one answer isn't particularly better than the other. Like if we just go and siege the Pheonix, yeah, we'll probably get the Pheonix. We might lose a couple people, but we'll probably get the Pheonix. The way that I wanted to do it was just push the wave, wait for the left lane to push into the left Pheonix so that our opponents have to send someone off to defend the left Pheonix, and then we push the right Pheonix, which I personally thought that was a better idea. I just thought we were going to clear the minions and then wait to siege. They don't want to. They want to fight. They get a pick. But they can't really siege because Kumba has a really good like anti-siege. So like Wukong tanks it for a little bit, but like, yeah, it just doesn't work out. And then everybody backs off. They have fire minions on their Titan, and they have a wave of fire minions pushing into the left Pheonix. They've sent people to defend them, so now is when we want to go for the Pheonix. Wukong's not happy about my decision, but again, I was just a little bit of miscommunication, like not quite understanding each other's thought processes, I suppose. But it doesn't really matter in the end because we end up like getting the Pheonix and winning. But again, like those little things, like the little wave management things, like understanding when you should push and like going to clear waves so that you can siege. Like sieging without minions usually isn't a good idea. And also grouping up like this kind of like it was good because this was the only Pheonix, right? So that we have fire minions putting pressure in the other lanes. But if other Phoenixes were up, we'd probably want to send like maybe Fenrir or Wukong just to siege the Pheonix on his own and have like a 1-4 or a 1-3-1 or a 2-3 and just like split so that we're putting pressure in multiple areas at once rather than just focusing on one. Because again, they have a really good anti-siege with Kumbhakarna, Afro, and Kabrakan. Kabrakan can put up his walls. If we get inside the Pheonix, Kumba just mezzes. Even if you kill Kumba, he'll probably just go into his passive, so you're not really going to kill him. They have Afro to sustain them. So even though we have the EFG that's healing us, Afro's sustain is pretty much going to be matching that. So just, yeah, just grouping up and sieging as 5 probably isn't a good idea, especially considering I'm playing Ares, and Ares is really not great into their team comp. Like, the only person that Ares can reliably ult is a Kabrakan. So this is an example of understanding where your focus should be. So we've got 4 people alive. We've got Anhur, Sun Wukong, and Fenrir that can all deal damage. The Titan has like 3k health, and they have half a Pheonix. So the Titan is not tanky at all. If we just go in and attack the Titan, it should take a couple autos, because especially since we have EFG, it'll just take a couple autos to kill it from Anhur. But unfortunately, I think they're going for kills maybe. But yeah. It should have been like easy to close that game out. But everybody dies, the Titan ends up getting reset, and it just drags the game out. If we had just focused the Titan there, I think, again, that would have been another situation where we just end the game. But now that's 2 situations where we could have won the game, but we didn't because we aren't like realizing these opportunities that we have. So now here's the decision that is kind of interesting. I was going to recall to finish my item, but I noticed that Sol was just split pushing in the duo lane. So I decided to go stop her because it's better to try to save the tower rather than, like, if I just recall, she gets the tower for free. She gets it anyways, but the whole point is that she doesn't get it for free, right? Like, you don't want to just give your opponents anything, really. You want to make them work for it. So here we have a nice little team fight. Our solo laners rotated over to the mid lane. We get 2 nice picks and straight to objectives. Right? So a general rule of thumb that I like to play by is when you get a pick, you have about 3 seconds to decide what you want to do. And it's the same for, like, if you're chasing a kill. You've probably got about 3 seconds that you can chase them before it's not worth it anymore. And you're better off just going to get farm somewhere else or resetting. So we go straight to Pyro. And then I think they push the mid a little bit. And then, again, you know, they're still on their respawn timers. And we just go straight to gold. It's really about understanding when you can take objectives, when you can take fights, and trying to push your lead. So we've got all of our ults available except Ravana ult. We've got ward coverage, and we've got some relics available. So even if our opponents come to fight us, we are so far ahead right now that they can't possibly hope to win. At best, they steal the Fury and maybe we die. Maybe they get like a kill or two. Which, now that I think about it, you need to understand what is... when something is worthwhile. So like, right there we got the gold Fury, but if the enemy team does show up, and I'd say about 2 of us, if 2 of us die, it's not worth it. If 1 of us die, it's kind of fine. That's why a lot of the times you'll see players just like go in and try to steal the gold Fury, and if they get it, great. If they don't, at least they tried. Because if they die to steal the Fury, it's totally worth it. It is 100% worth it. I don't really think the Pyromancer is worth dying for. It just doesn't really give you that much value at all. And here's another like example. I pinged fire because I thought we could do Fire Giant, but my team didn't want to do it, so I just have to go with the team. It is a team game, and you need to remember that sometimes going with a decision that you might not agree with is better than just ignoring your team. And they ended up being right, because if we had gone for fire, Saul would have split pushed the dual lane. So we do end up resetting and going to fire. And usually you don't want to coin flip fire, because if your opponent steals Fire Giant, it can actually like turn the game around. So they walked up and we ended up getting a nice little pick and just straight to fire. Don't even think about it, just go straight to fire. They can't steal it because their secure is gone now, right? Like Cuckoo's ultimate was their best chance of stealing the Fire Giant, and we are going to have Izanami's ult and probably Cuckoo's ult. It looks like it's coming off cooldown right about now to secure the Fire Giant if needed, which we didn't end up needing it. And then because we're so unhealthy, we just want to leave. If we were healthier, we could take the fight, but we want to reset right now, spend our gold, and then probably just siege towers. So now we're starting to approach the late game. It's about 22 minutes. Some of our team is close to level 20. We're not quite full build, but I consider this late game. This is where we want to start looking for Fire Giant. We already got one earlier, but this is where you want to start grouping up for objectives and team fights. So there are a couple different types of team fights. The one I'm going to talk about first is called front to back. A front to back team fight is exactly what it sounds like. It's where you just take the team fight and you just attack whoever's in front of you. Usually you do this if the enemy team has like a really strong anti-engage, so like they have a Geb, and when you try to dive them, you just get hit with a Geb ult, and it's really hard to get to the back line. You can just go front to back. Especially if you have like healers, you've got a solid front line, your ADCs are really fed, and you can just kind of tear through the tanks. Like, you just kill whoever's in front of you, go front to back. And that's a pretty solid way to team fight, in my opinion. It's not always the best option, but it works. Another way to team fight is if you have a dive comp. So like Ravana is really good at diving the backline with his ultimate if he has blink. Tyr is also good at diving. So if you have the team to dive the backline, you can kind of just dive them and pick the damage dealers first, and then worry about the tanks afterwards. Again, if they have an anti-engage team comp, like they have like a Geb or like a Ganesh or, you know, anyone with like really solid CC like that, maybe you don't want to try to dive. You want to just try to take it front to back or look for picks. Split pushing is another option if you have good split pushers. So like Apollo is really good at split pushing. Chernobog is really good at split pushing. Bakasura does pretty well. Anyone that's like safe or has really good like tower taking potential. So since we were talking about the dive team comps. One thing that you can do if you're playing like a mid laner or an ADC, there's something that I call the buddy system. Basically, if your team is very dive heavy, and you're like the squishies, you're the backline, you kind of want to stick together and try to keep each other safe. Because if the entire rest of your team is diving the enemy backline, the enemy team is probably going to come and try to kill you. So you guys need to stick together and just try to keep each other safe. And since we're talking about types of team fights, you really want to play to your team's strength. So if you have a late game team comp, you don't really want to fight early. You want to try to focus on farming and just scaling to your late game. If you have a really strong early game, you'll want to take that lead. You'll want to take advantage of that and try to snowball. If you have a dive heavy comp, you're going to want to try to dive as well as you can, but you also need to be able to adjust when those things don't work. So like if you have a dive heavy comp and diving just isn't working, then maybe you should try like split pushing or looking for picks, avoiding team fights altogether, and trying to take like little skirmishes here and there. You really need to be able to adjust your playstyle to what your opponent is doing and what your team is not able to do. And so that's kind of what we're doing here. We're kind of just going front to back. We're attacking whoever's in front of us. And it just works because we overpower them. They kind of have like not the greatest front line. Odin kind of tried to steal the Fury, which is probably not worth it. And now we've basically wiped their team. There are a couple options we can do. We either go straight to fire or we take towers and then go to fire. Personally, I like just taking fire. It's the safer option. You take it, reset, and then start preparing for the towers. Cuckoo decides that he wants to split push, which is it's fine. It's a good call here, I think. We have enough damage to take the fire giant, and that way we get some pressure in the mid lane as well. So in every role, resource management is extremely important. So this is an example of understanding how to manage your XP and gold, essentially. So I noticed one of my camps is still up, the Cyclops camp. So I give Baba Yaga solo XP, and I go take this Cyclops camp. I guess the dual lane just didn't clear it when they started, and it's kind of obvious they're behind a little bit. They lost a little bit. But I give Baba Yaga this solo lane, or this solo wave of experience, and now notice that she's level 3 and Kuku's only level 2. Baba Yaga is now ahead. I might be behind a little bit, but my early game is honestly garbage. Like, it doesn't matter if I'm behind right now. So it's really important to allocate your resources like that. Like, if I just leave this Cyclops camp up, it's not going to respawn. It's just going to sit there. Nobody's going to clear it, and it's just wasted gold and XP. And now we've cleared the mid wave, straight to the neutral farm. And you want to always be trying to look at where you can potentially gank or what sort of farm you can pick up. We could just go for shield buff here, but I noticed that the dual lane is pushed up a little bit. Maybe we can get a kill. It ends up being all right. I think it's 2 for 2. It's not the best trade, but you know.
We must protect our allies so that they may protect this plane.
I think what Hachiman did here was really smart. He played around the minion wave, and it allowed him to survive long enough to take out Freya. So playing around the minion wave is also really important, particularly in the early game. You can use minions to dodge auto attacks or skill shots, certain skill shots. And now these camps are respawning. Because I took the Cyclops camp late, I don't want to go to right lane because there's not as much farm in right lane, and I can't really capitalize. It's not going to be as efficient. If I go left, I've got the speed buff, we've got the XP camps, the blue buffs. So I don't know if you've noticed, but I have almost never been mid lane this game. The only time I go mid is to kill Cuckoo, and I immediately leave. That's because there's nothing for me in mid lane. It's actually more beneficial for me to just let Baba Yaga have the solo farm and get ahead of Cuckoo. So like Baba Yaga's level 12, Cuckoo's level 10. And again, they're under tower. Their purple buff's up. Just invade the purple. I was going to go dive through the tower, but they got the kill anyways. And Hachiman's too healthy, so it's not really worth it.
Oh, it is hard.
I was going to look for some of the farm, but Kali ended up showing up. So this is something important. It's called counter ganking. I could just leave, but if I show up there, we can fight into them. Kali has no mana, which means she definitely can't ult. And Hachiman just used his dash as well. Tyr's pretty healthy. We kind of just win the 2v2 here.
Did their part. An enemy has been slain.
So again, Kali ganked the duo lane. Even though I wasn't there to help them, we can still counter gank. So Hachiman gets out, which is unfortunate, but there's no way Kali escapes this.
Your wild instinct.
So this is just like a bot game to show you an example of proxy farming. It's just when you go and farm minions between the T1 and the T2, or between the Pheonix and the other tower. You generally don't want to do it this early, but because it's easy bots, I kind of just can, because they're bad. But the reason you would say proxy farm would be to, if you want to recall and you don't want your opponent to have a wave to push into your tower, or maybe you want to rotate mid and get a nice little gank off, or invade the enemy jungle. There are a lot of reasons you could want to proxy farm, but you need to be a god that can safely proxy farm. So like Hades I like to proxy farm on, Vamana can do it pretty well. Anyone that like can just get away really easy or is like super hard to kill. So I'm just going to talk about warding a little bit, and so it's going to jump around between different like spots as I find some good wards. These wards down here outside the Phoenixes, they're kind of good for defending against sieges. I would have put them a little bit over, like maybe right on the right outside the doors. And what they do is they let you see when your opponents cross the lanes, cross over into different lanes. And you can also get some poke off if you have ranged abilities that go through walls. If you're sieging into the Phoenixes, putting wards on the insides of the doors can be helpful, or putting sentry wards outside of the doors. So the sentry wards prevent your opponents from having vision, and the wards inside the doors give you vision inside of their base. You have to be careful not to put them in the Phoenix line though, because if they're in the Phoenix, then they actually show up and your opponents can just destroy them. So these wards here I like up by the Fire Giant. I like to put them at the intersections. I don't really like warding on Fire Giant. The only time I would ward on Fire Giant is probably to sentry it to deny vision from my opponents, or if there's a sentry on fire and I want our team to try to steal it, I'll put one like right up in the corner here so that it's out of range of the sentry, because normally people put the sentries towards this like the middle-ish area of the pit, and it doesn't quite reach the outside of the FG pit. So you put one like right in the corners there, and you can actually get vision on the FG without having it in sentry range if you do it right. And if your opponents have like a sentry in the right spot. It's kind of tricky. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it can give you vision of FG if you want to try to steal it. These wards here outside the Fury, I like them just when I'm doing the Fury, because any avenue that your opponent takes to come in to steal or fight the Fury, you'll have vision of. The only one you don't is this one right here by the purple buff. But if you have someone else that has, like, you can only place 2 wards, right? And if you have someone else that has a ward, you could put one there. They could put one over here, and you can also just look, like, with your eyes, because there's no, you can look and see past the wall over there. I really like these wards here as a support. I put them down. This one by the green buff gives me a lot of information. It can catch them if they're doing the green buff, if they rotate into mid lane through the Oracle lane thingy, or if they rotate out and go to gank dual lane, it'll give that information. This one is purely just for the ADC. If somebody recalls and they go to gank the dual lane, I'll show up on the ward and it'll just give my ADC a little bit of an early notice. Sometimes I'll ward on the buff camps as well if I'm trying to play a little bit more aggressively and I don't have the timers on them. That'll just tell me when the camp comes up, and it can kind of give you an idea of where the jungler is when they clear their camps. And that's another thing that I didn't really go over, but it's kind of important. It's called jungle tracking. So this is when you see, say, the jungler shows up in the mid lane, and you see them go into the right jungle. If you're a solo laner, that would be your cue to like either ward or maybe play a little bit safer, because you know that the jungler is going to be in the right jungle. And the same thing is true for the jungler. Let's say you see the enemy jungler in the mid lane and they go right. You now can decide if you want to go right and try to counter gank, or maybe you want to go left and gank the dual lane because you know that their jungler can't respond to it, and then maybe take their farm away. So it's just all these little decisions that you make really impact the game a lot. So that's it for the video. I hope you learned something and it helped improve your gameplay. The key things to take away from this are that you need to focus on farming and denying your opponent's resources. Kills aren't going to win you the game. You need to test your limits. Go for plays that you aren't quite sure about, because the only way you're really going to improve is by taking risks and failing. You need to fail enough times that you know what the right decision is. Pay attention to the minimap. Make sure that when you get a lead, you're pushing your lead. And try to focus more on yourself and less on your teammates. You can't control what your teammates can do, but you can control what you do and how you react to situations. It is a team game, so even though your team might want to do something that you don't agree with, it's usually just better to go along with it and hope that it works out, even if you don't agree with it. And who knows, maybe your decision wasn't the correct one. There often is more than just one correct decision, and you really need to evaluate the risk and reward.
It's time to fight back. Your middle tower is under attack.
EMP.